In a city with a long history of racism on every street corner, a black man takes on a relentless battle with society's prejudices. Elijah Carter, a 25-year veteran of the police force, is newly appointed police chief. But instead of simply accepting the job, he decides to do the unthinkable. To learn the truth about his subordinates, he disguises himself as a homeless man and enters the police station, which leaves him deeply saddened. Can Elijah change this long-standing toxic culture? And are the police, who could be his colleagues, willing to listen and change? This story will make you think about courage, justice, and the power of change. If you like this content, don't forget to like, share this story with friends and family, and especially subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories. Greenwood is a city in the heart of the American South, a beautiful blend of historic buildings and modern neighborhoods. However, behind the red brick streets and lush parks lies a social scar that has not healed. Deep racism still smolders in the community. Greenwood's history is intertwined with the civil rights movement, but those gains seem to have only scratched the surface. In reality, the neighborhoods remain sharply divided. Whites are concentrated in the north, with its upscale homes, while the south is largely black, with crumbling infrastructure and scarce economic opportunities. The Greenwood Police Department has long had a reputation for bias. Stories of officers refusing to protect or even using excessive force against people of color have become all too familiar. People don't trust those who are supposed to protect them. Discrimination even exists within the department itself, with officers of color rarely promoted to higher positions. In that gloomy landscape, Elijah Carter emerged as a ray of hope. At 50, he was a strong-built man with bright eyes and a confident smile. Elijah grew up in a poor black community in a neighboring city where he witnessed social injustice firsthand. With over 25 years of police experience, Elijah has been a dedicated officer who has always stood for justice regardless of race. He is known for his reforms at his previous police department, where he created an equal work environment and built trust with the community. That is why Thomas Greenwood selected him for the role of police chief, a controversial but hopeful decision. Elijah, however, knew he was treading on prejudicial territory. The news of a black man being appointed police chief quickly became a hot topic. Some supported him, seeing it as a necessary step for change, but many were skeptical or even openly opposed, especially those within the Greenwood Police Department itself. Elijah knew that to reform the Greenwood Police Department, he needed to see the truth about it. Reports, statistics, and formal meetings couldn't tell him what the culture really was. He needed to know how employees behaved and acted when the eyes of their superiors weren't on them. One evening, sitting in his makeshift office, Elijah had a bold idea. He would disguise himself as a homeless man and go to the police station. This plan would not only help him see how officers treat vulnerable people, but also test their professional ethics in everyday situations. The next morning, Elijah dressed for his plan. He wore an old, tattered coat, dirty shoes, and a woolen cap pulled low over his face. He took one last look at himself in the mirror. The once dignified sheriff had turned into a tired, homeless man. On the way to the police station, Elijah felt a heavy heart. He remembered his first days in the police force, when he was a young and enthusiastic man. At that time, he believed that all police officers were on the side of justice, but over the years, he realized that not all were. Greenwood will be the biggest challenge of his career, not just because of the history of racism, but because of the toxic culture that permeates the organization. He knows change will take time, but to start, he must understand the roots of the problem. Elijah walked through the front door of the Greenwood Police Department, looking like a tired homeless man. The air inside was cold, the blue-white fluorescent lighting highlighting the shiny but lifeless floors. A few officers were gathered in the reception area, chatting and laughing, the sound echoing in the large space. Elijah tried to keep his composure as he approached the front desk. A young policeman, Ryan Matthews, about 30 years old, was sitting behind the counter, his legs crossed on the desk, fiddling with his phone. Ryan had short hair, a stern face, but his eyes were full of complacency. He looked up when he saw Elijah, his eyes flashing with contempt. "Hey, what are you doing here?" Ryan asked, his voice cold, not hiding his annoyance. Elijah bowed slightly, his voice soft but clear. I need help. I'm hungry, and I don't know where else to go. Can you help me? Ryan smirked, put down the phone, and stood up, moving closer to the counter. Help! This isn't a charity church or a charity camp, old man, Ryan said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. If you want to eat, get out of here and find a job. Elijah tried to keep calm, though his heart was pounding. He wanted to continue testing the other policemen. So he added, I really have nowhere else to go. I just need some food or some directions. Ryan interrupted him with a loud laugh, turning back to his colleagues sitting in the corner of the room. Listen, guys, we have a homeless old man here begging. Funny, right? Laughter erupted from the group of policemen sitting behind. A few turned to look at Elijah, their eyes filled with disdain. One of them even whistled as if watching a comedy show. Elijah glanced around the room, trying to find someone who would sympathize with him, but was met with either mocking smiles or indifferent looks. He realized that no one was making any move to intervene or to stop Ryan's actions. Ryan walked out of the reception desk, walked straight to Elijah, and stood before him with an aggressive look. Listen, old man, I don't have time to waste with lazy people like you. You're dirtying up this police station. Get out before I call more men to drag you out. Elijah stood still, trying to keep calm. I just asked for a little humanity, he said, his voice hoarse. I thought the police were supposed to protect and help the weak. Elijah's sentence was cut short by Ryan's mocking laughter. Humanity? What do you think this is, a charity? Don't drag us into your cheap stories, Ryan said, his voice full of sarcasm. The policeman sitting nearby laughed even louder. One even sarcastically said, Ryan, don't forget to buy him a cup of coffee. He must be thirsty. Hearing this, Ryan suddenly turned back to the reception desk, picked up his half-drunk coffee cup, and turned back to Elijah. Oh yes, coffee. Here's my humanity to you. With that, Ryan lifted the cup of coffee and poured it straight down onto Elijah's tattered jacket. The warm liquid seeped through the old fabric, leaving a large stain on the shirt and giving off a strong smell. The room erupted in laughter, as if this were some kind of joke. Ryan stepped back, arms crossed, smiling smugly. Now get out, before I have to resort to drastic measures. Elijah felt the wet coffee run down his chest, but he did not raise his hand to wipe it away. He stood still, his eyes fixed on Ryan, his eyes shining with a deep sadness, but also with determination. You have demonstrated a sad point, Elijah said, his voice calm but heavy. People like me, weak, vulnerable, should be your protection. Instead, you choose to ridicule and humiliate. You have not only hurt me, but also dishonored the very honor of this profession. Ryan was surprised by Elijah's calmness, but quickly regained his arrogant demeanor. Are you giving me a moral lecture? He said, his voice full of defiance. Get out of here, before I have to throw you out. Elijah said nothing more. He turned and walked slowly out of here, before I have to throw you out. Elijah said nothing more. He turned and walked slowly out of the police station. Each step was heavy, as if the weight of a generation of prejudice and discrimination were weighing on his shoulders. The humiliation, the ridicule, the broken trust in those who were supposed to be his colleagues were etched in his mind. As he walked out, no one in the police station stopped laughing or looking at him. The laughter of Ryan and the young cops echoed behind him like a shadow, following him down the long road. They did not know that the man they had just mocked was the new police chief of the city, the one who would lead them in their change. Elijah told himself that they would find out soon, but not now. As the police station doors closed behind him, he paused, took a deep breath. His frustration was still there, but he knew he couldn't let those feelings get the best of him. He couldn't let racism, ignorance, and contempt continue to exist in the police force. He had to do something. He had to change. The first thing Elijah decided was not to react hastily. He did not want to do what the police were expecting, a heated confrontation or a public argument. He knew that doing so would not only accomplish nothing, but only make things worse. Instead, he decided to go to the Thomas. Only with the support of the government and the authorities could he completely change the situation. As he pulled into the parking lot, Elijah looked into his rearview mirror, his own face reflected in the glass, and he couldn't help but wonder. He had faced many challenges in his career, but this one was especially difficult. How could he change a team whose structure was so deeply ingrained? How could he undo the racism that had been so ingrained in the thinking of so many in the force? But then he remembered why he got into policing in the first place. To serve the community. To be an example to others and to ensure that justice would not be skewed for any reason. This was not just his job. It was his calling. And he could not let a system of racism and brutality continue to undermine those values. On the way to the Thomas's office, Elijah couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in the police station that morning. The humiliation was not only physically painful, but also mentally painful. He had devoted his life to serving justice, but was met with contempt in the very house of justice. Such taunts, contemptuous looks, and demeaning actions, how could they be acceptable in a police force? When he arrived at the Thomas's office, Elijah didn't say anything right away. He stood in front of the office door, his hand on it for a moment, then took a deep breath. Although he was a little nervous, he also knew that his decision would have far-reaching consequences. Thomas Whitaker was sitting behind his desk when Elijah walked in. He invited Elijah to sit down and listen. After Elijah had recounted the whole story of that morning, from the taunts to Ryan spilling coffee on him, the Thomas was silent for a long moment. He looked Elijah in the eye, his expression serious. "Elijah, I'm so sorry about what happened. This is an unacceptable insult. We need to act immediately." Elijah nodded, but he knew that words were not enough. Actions needed to be taken. That was why he had come to see the Thomas today. "I want the Thomas to help me hold a meeting with the entire police department. I will announce my appointment, and I will change the way things are done here," Elijah said. "Justice is not just an ideal. It has to be a reality. I cannot let police like this continue to tarnish the reputation of this force." Thomas Collins looked at him for a moment, then agreed. "I understand. I will support you all the way, Elijah. This is a big challenge, but I believe you can do it." As he left the Thomas's office, Elijah felt a little lighter in his spirit. He knew he couldn't change everything immediately, but the first step had been taken. Meanwhile, at the police station, the policemen he had met this morning continued their lives as if nothing had happened. "It's been a long time since anyone's been this funny." A young policeman laughed as he saw the cup of coffee Ryan had poured over Elijah. "That's ridiculous," added another. "Who does he think he is, asking for help here?" An older policeman sat nearby, looking wearily at the young men around him. He shook his head but said nothing. He knew this was not the first time this had happened in the police department, but he probably didn't expect much change. The taunts continued, but none of them realized that someone was coming to change everything. They had no idea that the person they had just insulted would be their sheriff, the one who would force them to face up to their own actions and not let racism and insensitivity continue to exist within this department. But all they needed was time. Time to realize that Elijah Carter was not a man to be trifled with. Time to realize that, even if they didn't know it, a revolution was beginning right here in this police department. Next morning, the atmosphere in the police station seemed to be as normal as any other day. There was nothing unusual about the laughter and gossip between the officers. The young policemen were still gathering together, discussing cases or the fun things of the day. However, this tranquility was about to be broken violently. The main door of the police station suddenly opened, causing everyone in the room to stop and turn their heads to look at the entrance. A black man wearing a sheriff's uniform walked in. His figure was sturdy. His eyes were looking straight ahead like a leader. Standing next to him was Thomas Whitaker, a man everyone knew and respected. They were not only powerful people in the city, but also people of great influence. In the silence, Elijah Carter's footsteps echoed, reverberating through the hallways like a warning. The new city police chief had arrived, and what was about to happen would change everything in this police department. Thomas Collins stepped up to the podium, and all eyes in the room turned to him. He steadied himself for a moment, then spoke in a strong, confident voice. "Today I am honored to introduce to you our new police chief, Elijah Carter." Thomas Collins turned to Elijah, pointing at him in a gesture of recognition. Elijah Carter, our newly appointed chief of police, will lead our police department for many years to come. A short period of silence passed. Everyone, from the veteran cops to the young cops, could not believe their ears. The rumors that a black man would become the police chief were unprecedented in the history of this police department, especially since the name Elijah Carter was familiar to them. He was the man they had unintentionally insulted and ridiculed just the day before. Just yesterday they had laughed at his tattered uniform and treated him like a homeless person. And now the man they had despised was the one who would be their leader. A silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to Elijah. They could not believe that this man was the new sheriff. The room was dead silent for a moment, especially Ryan Matthews, the young cop who had spilled coffee on Elijah and mocked him yesterday morning, now stood frozen, his face expressionless. He swallowed, trying to find the words to explain but couldn't. The laughter he and his colleagues had shared yesterday now stabbed him like a knife straight into his heart. He didn't dare look Elijah in the eye, because everything had changed completely now. As Ryan's eyes met Elijah's, he felt a deep shame creep into every corner of his mind. Everything he had thought about this man suddenly shattered. Elijah was not a weak man he could mock, but a man with real power, someone who could change everything. Chief Elijah Carter stood tall, his gaze unwavering, but deep down he felt the complexity of the situation. It was not just a job, but a mission that he had to carry out. He knew that this appointment would not be easy for him, especially when his colleagues all had such contemptuous attitudes, but he was ready to face the challenge. Thomas Collins did not let the silence last long. He stepped forward and continued with his speech, creating a serious yet hopeful atmosphere. Chief Elijah Carter will be the man to lead this department. With his vast experience and commitment to justice, I am confident he will get this department back on track. We have confidence in him and support him in every decision he makes. As soon as the Thomas finished speaking, Elijah stepped forward, facing the entire police department. Every step he took was a statement of intent. He didn't need to say anything, but everyone could feel the power in his every move. The tension remained until Elijah spoke. I want you to understand that I didn't come here just to work. I came here to make a change. I came here to make this department a place that is fair and respectful to all citizens, regardless of race, class, or color. Discrimination and disrespect like what I experienced yesterday are unacceptable in this department. Elijah's words were like a bomb exploding in the air. Everyone fell silent, especially Ryan and the young cops who had laughed at him earlier. They began to realize the seriousness of the situation. They could not imagine that the new police chief was the person they had insulted so cruelly. Now, their actions would have to pay the price. The room fell into a suffocating silence, save for the soft breathing of the officers sitting and standing around, their eyes fixed on Elijah. These officers, who had grown accustomed to a work environment where racism and disdain were easily tolerated, were now faced with a change they had not anticipated. A barely concealed fear began to rise in each of them as Elijah stood before them, whom they had just learned was the new chief of police, one who would not hesitate to confront any form of inappropriate behavior. Elijah waited a moment when the silence had settled enough to fill the tense atmosphere in the room. Then he spoke, not shouting or ostentatious, but still powerful and clear. Ethics underpin every decision we make in this job, Elijah said, his voice deep and steady. We are guardians of justice, defenders of fairness, and defenders of the rights of all citizens. We have a responsibility not only to the people of this country, but also to the people of the world. We are the guardians of justice, defenders of fairness, and defenders of the rights of all citizens. We have a responsibility not only to the law, but also to the human values we are committed to serving. Every action, every word we say has an impact not only on the community, but also on the colleagues who stand beside us. He paused, looking at each person in the room, letting his words sink in. His eyes fell on Ryan Matthews, the young policeman standing in the corner, pale, his hands clasped together, not daring to look up. Yesterday, one of you behaved in an unacceptable manner toward me. Elijah continued, his eyes never leaving Ryan. You made fun of me, mocked me, insulted me, and poured coffee on me just because I was dressed like a homeless person, but you didn't know that I was the one who would lead you in the future. You were wrong, and this wrong cannot be tolerated." Elijah did not speak loudly, but every word he uttered was like a sharp knife, cutting into the hearts of those standing there, making them feel unable to escape the tension and awareness of past mistakes. He did not need to condemn, because his attitude and words were enough to make everyone understand that he would not forgive these mistakes. "Ryan Matthews, your behavior yesterday was not only disrespectful to me, but it was disrespectful to the work and values that we stand for. You not only insulted me, you insulted the dignity of a human being. And what is even sadder is that none of you stood up to stop it. You let this happen without intervening, without defending my dignity, and without standing up for what is right." A sigh rose from several people in the room, but no one dared to speak up, for they knew full well that Elijah's words were true. The young policeman who had stood with Ryan yesterday laughing and mocking now felt ashamed and remorseful. They had no one to blame but themselves, for they knew that they had turned a blind eye to this grave insult. "So my decision is clear," Elijah said, his eyes hard and unwavering. "Ryan Matthews, you are hereby terminated. You have failed to demonstrate the basic qualities of a police officer, to show respect for your colleagues and the citizens we are charged with protecting. Your conduct is unacceptable in a police force." The room fell silent for a moment, and several of the officers looked at each other, unable to believe that this decision had been made. Ryan stood still, his eyes lost, as if he could not comprehend what was happening. He had thought he could escape the consequences of his actions, but now he was faced with a very harsh reality. The stupidity of mocking a homeless person was not only disrespectful to the individual, but also disrespectful to the nature of this profession. Elijah continued, "It is not just Ryan Matthews, but each of you who has a responsibility to uphold ethics and respect in the workplace. You cannot allow this type of misconduct to continue in this workplace. You cannot allow racism, ridicules, or disrespect to be tolerated. If you cannot stand up for each other, then we cannot be a real team." Elijah's eyes scanned the room, and he could see the confusion, the shame, and the deep realization that what he said was true. The young cops began to feel the weight of their responsibilities, and understood that they had a great responsibility not only to their jobs, but also to their colleagues, and most of all to the communities they served. "For that reason," Elijah continued, "I have decided that all police officers here, from the new recruits to the veterans, will take a mandatory course in ethics and proper conduct. This course will include lessons on respecting the dignity of all citizens, regardless of race, sex, or social class. If anyone cannot abide by these principles, they will have no place here." Once again, the atmosphere in the room became tense. No one in the police department dared to object. They knew that Elijah's decision was the right one, and they understood that this was not only a lesson in work, but also a lesson in human dignity, in respect for oneself and those around one. Elijah ended his speech with a clear statement: "We are police officers. We are called upon to protect and serve our community not because of titles or power, but because we have a great responsibility to justice, and I will not tolerate any behavior that goes against that principle." Everyone in the room stood still, not daring to breathe, as if they were living a solemn, unforgettable moment. Ryan stood there, his face unable to hide his regret and shame, while the other policemen began to realize that change had come, and they would have to accept and follow the new rules that Elijah had set. Soon after Elijah made the decision to fire Ryan Matthews and announce plans to require all police officers to take ethics training, news of the changes to the city's police department spread like wildfire. Rumors, text messages, and gossip were quickly shared on social media, in coffee shop conversations, and at community meetings. Elijah's decisive and forceful actions not only put the city's police department in the spotlight, but also sent a wave of hope and belief in real change throughout the community. For those who live in a city where racism and prejudice have long been ingrained in the culture, the arrival of a black police chief like Elijah Carter was a shock, but also a clear sign of change. Articles about him, from thoughtful analyses to terse status updates, spoke of a leader who was resolute, forthright, and fair. Many began to see him as a symbol of hope, someone who would not only reform the police department, but also help transform the community, helping people live together in an environment of fairness and mutual respect. Within the police department, some officers who had previously taken for granted the importance of ethics and respect in their work began to change their attitudes after taking a mandatory course on ethics and professional conduct. The lessons about respect for all citizens, regardless of race, gender, or social class, made them rethink their own past behavior. They began to have a clearer understanding of their role in upholding justice and fairness, and that they themselves had a responsibility to protect and serve the communities to which they were committed. One officer, Daniel Reed, who had previously been indifferent to issues of racism, began to proactively change the way he did his job. He became involved in community programs, interacting with and supporting people he once thought were undeserving of police help. After completing the course, he even began writing blog posts about his experiences and how Elijah had changed both the police department and the community. Another officer, Sophia Bennett, who had previously not spoken up about discriminatory behavior in the department, now actively participates in discussions and shares her views on workplace behavior. She has begun to speak up when she sees inappropriate behavior, and she helps new police officers understand the importance of ethics in their work. At community meetings, where people had little opportunity to talk to police before, Elijah began creating open spaces where people could meet and share their concerns with officers. These face-to-face conversations helped break down barriers between police and the public, and more importantly, helped reduce suspicion and fear among communities across the city. Not only within the police department, but also in the community, Elijah has become a symbol of change and hope. The Black community, which has long faced prejudice and racism in the city, feels proud to see one of their own step up to this important leadership role. They feel that they finally have a protector and leader who truly understands and shares the struggles they face. Civil rights organizations and community advocacy groups also began to praise Elijah's decision, saying that his actions were a clear demonstration that fair, non-discriminatory leadership was possible and necessary. Elijah was invited to speak at civil rights conferences, and each time he spoke, he received enthusiastic applause from the attendees. Even residents of communities that were somewhat unfamiliar with racial issues began to change their views of the police department. They might have felt embarrassed or intimidated by the thought of the police before, but now they felt that with Elijah at their helm, the police could actually be trusted guardians, not just of the law, but of justice and fairness. Elijah not only transformed the police department, but also the way the community viewed the force. He understood that change would not happen overnight, but he also knew that with courage, fairness, and humility, he could create an environment where everyone was treated fairly and with respect. During the final meetings of the ethics course, Elijah stood before all the police officers, his eyes shining with unwavering conviction. We are police officers, and our job is to protect and serve all people without distinction. That is the responsibility we agreed to when we entered this profession. And I pledge to you, I will do everything in my power to make this department a place where no one needs to fear being treated unfairly. I will do everything in my power to make this department a place where no one needs to fear being treated unfairly. I will ensure that every decision we make reflects our values and respect for one another. We will not only be law enforcement officers, but also friends to the community. Elijah not only transformed the department, but he became a role model for the community. With his leadership, a new era has begun for the department and for the community, where justice, respect, and compassion will always guide all actions.